Does Putin love Russia? No, and it's clear. Well, I've just watched Lex Fridman's interview with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and Fridman asked some questions aiming to get at the issue of peace and whether Putin is a reliable negotiation partner. And so the way Fridman asked these questions might come across a little bit naive, but let's just give him the benefit of the doubt. I saw the way he asked these questions as a good prompt for Zelenskyy to respond to. There was one question, though, that I must admit struck me a little bit odd. And that's when Fridman insisted that, well, certainly Putin must love his country. Certainly Putin must love Russia. I mean, it's a good question to ask. It's maybe a reasonable assumption to have for a normal politician. In democratic countries like the United States, most European countries and other countries in the world, you typically don't gain peace of mind when you're the president or when you're prime minister or when you're the leader of the country in any way or in any leadership function. Within any democratic structure, being in leadership is something that you typically really have to want to do. So Fridman asking this question in that way means he is conditioned by what he knows about democratic leadership. I mean, no matter where I might disagree, for instance, with Donald Trump, I don't doubt that he would have a quieter life if he wasn't, again, going to be president. I mean, everybody knows that he otherwise could have a nice life on Mar-a-Lago. Being president has not meant that he would have an easier life. I don't even believe he necessarily makes more money because of that. So, in that sense, I don't doubt that Trump loves America. I don't doubt that most democratic leaders love the countries they're in because it takes so much of a commitment, so much of a level of self-abuse to even seek such a leadership position. So that, to me, is a completely different category. When it comes to Putin, it's a little bit different. So when you ask the question of love, why does someone love somebody? It's not a question of feelings. You can't measure love. You can't measure feelings by saying, well, what's deep in people's hearts? That's irrelevant. People may even believe they love someone or something without actually loving them. Yeah, people are able to delude themselves. What counts are actions. What is a country? A country is its people. A country is its people, its accumulation of people throughout time. A country is also its boundaries, its cities, its resources, but the one thing that can never be restored if it's lost are its people. So if you ask does so-and-so love that country, then the answer has to be, does so-and-so love the people in this country? All of them. Because otherwise, it's just love for an idea. So if you love Russia because you love its boundaries, if you love its trees, you love its resources, that's love of an object. But it's love of an object that doesn't have any people in it. When you say, I really love the notion of being in the biggest country on the planet, then you love the idea of size. You don't really love that country. Why does that not count? Why is the notion to love something because of its size not relevant? Because that's fleeting. That's, if you look down into history, the least important measurement of any country. So if you look at Russian history, Russia has had different sizes throughout time. But when you ask what a country is, what a nation is, what a people are, let's go to Benedict Anderson's idea of an imagined community. You imagine a community of people moving throughout time, sharing certain things with each other, good or bad. Europeans like the idea that the US is a young country. Well, the United States was founded in 1776. Germany was founded in 1871. You say, well, but the German people have pre-existed. That's true. But you can't get around the fact that the country is younger than the United States. When you say the people that lived in the area, well, even then the United States, I mean, there were native peoples before that. And, our American antiquities, go to areas in the southwest, and you see a lot of old cities, evidence of pre-existing civilization. But of course, that's not what we mean when we say America, normally. When you look at Russia, you see a people that initially gained something of statehood in what is called the Kievan Rus. So Kiev, in the Russian understanding, is a core historical antecedent of what Russia is today. So when you hear Putin talk, he will mention these things. He will not mention that Kiev is Ukrainian. He, in his thinking, thinks it's Russian, because he associates Russia with the state going back to that time. Now, the reason I mentioned Germany and the United States before is both are countries with changing territories in the past. And that is actually the rule in history. Hardly any country, I really can't think of a single one that has had their boundaries not changed throughout time. Maybe San Marino or something small like that, a city-state. That would probably be where you have to look. So if you tie your understanding of your country to geography, even to political entities, it can be misleading. Putin seems to own in his mind all these territories still that ever were Russian. In fact, the idea is everywhere where people are that speak Russian, there should be Russia. Well, Governor Pavlovsky, that's all I want to say here. I learned Russian in East Germany when I grew up. Grade 5, first words, Daska. and okna, so blackboard and window. And so I love the language. It was forced onto me, but it is a beautiful language, one of the few languages that is actually really logical. So I live in Oregon now. Does this mean where I live should be Russian? I mean, that's lunacy. Everywhere where there are Russian speakers, there should be Russian. Well, Hitler thought that everywhere where people speak German should be Germany. That's why the Anschluss happened. That's why Austria, the Sudetenland, and other areas were added to Germany by Hitler. People speak different languages in different countries. Sometimes they speak the same language. The United States, again, as a good example for people who speak English, they may speak with an American accent, but it's called English because it comes from England. So try telling Americans they should go back to England. I don't think that will work that well. Same language is a very, very bad criterion. People in India fought for independence, even though English had been spoken there, is still spoken in India. That's not a criterion. So there are people in Ukraine that speak Russian. President Zelensky grew up with Russian. Should they be part of Russia then? Well, I've already shown that this narrative doesn't make much sense. Let's say Vladimir Putin loves Russian speakers. What are the people speaking that he kills? A lot of them in Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Kharkiv, even Kiev. They speak Russian. And they're being killed by him. They have been killed by him. They have been moved forcefully. Their children have been stolen. Many of them have been raped, tortured, and as I said, killed. And these were people who spoke Russian. He has forced people from these areas to fight against other Ukrainians. These are all people who wanted to be part of Ukraine. When Ukraine became independent after the Soviet Union, the results of referenda were clear. All of them wanted to be in Ukraine rather than Russia, including people in Crimea. These were people who spoke Ukrainian or Russian or even other languages, and they said, I am Ukrainian no matter what language I speak. So if Putin says, this is not Ukraine, this is Russia, and I love Russia, then why is he destroying these areas? Why is he killing its people? Russian speakers, by the way, that he claims to be Russian. His actions are what demonstrates his love. As Zelensky pointed out, he waged war against Chechnya. We now know that that war was fought under false pretenses. Chechnya was part of Russia, was not part of the republics that were part of the Soviet Union. Chechnya was part of the Russian federal state within the Soviet Union. Yeah, and so Chechnya was destroyed. Grozny was leveled, like he would later level Aleppo, like he would later level Mariupol, Bakhmut, and other cities. So where's the love? He even extended his love to Syria He extended his love to Georgia, Moldova, and to several African countries too. If that is love, then your idea of love is that of an abuser. This has been a war of choice for Putin. It was a war of choice when he invaded Crimea, when he invaded the Donbas area. It has been a war of choice when he extended that invasion to the rest of Ukraine. And when he failed at Hostomel Airport, he could have said, okay, doesn't work. I don't want to waste any more lives. Ukrainians clearly want to be Ukrainians. Let's stop the whole insanity. If you love people, you do that. Ukraine has not been a threat to him. It has been a threat to his tyranny. It has been a threat to his imperial designs. And Zelensky is right. Putin has designs on the entire Soviet space and beyond. There are two claims here that he has, the Soviet claim and the claim of Third Rome. When the Byzantine Empire fell, Orthodox church leaders went first to Kiev and then later to Moscow. And this is why, after the Soviet Union fell, Russia introduced or reintroduced this double eagle, the Byzantine eagle, as the successor of Rome. This is, of course, all ideology. It's all, you could say, hogwash, but it is what you hear in some propagandist speeches. So the design is on any territory that once used to be Russia, and probably also in its imperial claim, the desire to go to areas that he could claim as a czar that doesn't want to call himself czar, that he should need. Yeah, Syria with the warm weather port was one of his desired objects. Is this love or greed? If Putin loved Russians, he wouldn't even have started the war against Chechnya. He wouldn't have started the war against Ukraine in 2014. He would have focused on making sure that every Russian has running water and gas and electricity, that Russian streets look like every other European street, that Russian industry isn't just extractive, but actually produces something. He would have made sure that people make more in their retirement than a pittance. He would have made sure that people see a future in the country. And if you love your people, you give them democracy because you realize them as the true sovereign. Otherwise, you just see them as slaves, and that's what Russians are to him. He kills them. He sends them into a useless war. He even sends North Koreans into a useless war. He has invited sanctions, probably didn't think that the world would do them, but he has risked it, and sanctions have come, and sanctions are hurting twofold. Some things don't come into Russia anymore, and most other things that still come are more expensive. Sanctions are working. The only economy he's growing is the war economy. This won't last. So the economic future of his people is at stake. The international reputation of Russia is done. The only reason that some people want to appease Russia is because they're afraid of it. Because they think it's a country of lunatics that would throw nukes at them. That's the only reason anybody ever thinks about appeasement. Yeah, so we don't even know whether these nukes work. And it wouldn't give him any benefit. Throw a nuclear bomb onto Kyiv, what would that achieve? It would only make people angrier. It would only increase resistance. Throw a nuke at London or Paris or Berlin or Washington, D.C., as he has his people talk on Russian propaganda? Really? What would that do? That would only invite destruction. He is threatening his own people with annihilation. That's what he's doing. He's threatening the West, but by that, he's threatening his own people because he does not love them. The damage to Russian culture is the next thing. My favorite composers, as you may guess from the music I myself write, is situated within the 19th and 20th century in classical music. And, well, it's difficult for me to throw Bruckner off the top, but after Bruckner, Shostakovich, Prokofiev, Tchaikovsky, I mean, you can't beat those composers. One of the biggest insults to Russian culture was the destruction of the Donetsk airport, which was named after Sergei Prokofiev, a Ukrainian-born Russian. I believe Tchaikovsky has Ukrainian roots too. But they're both deeply in Russian culture. I actually like what Gergiev does with Russian music. His collection of Shostakovich symphonies, the war symphonies, where he narrates them and he shows a deep understanding of Shostakovich is, in my view, just magnificent. Now, we can all differ in our opinion. Now, every time I see Gergiev, I have to say, well, yeah, okay, godfather to one of Putin's kids or grandkids, I don't know, I don't care. Probably in Putin's camp because he's Ossetian, and Putin led South Ossetia back into Russia to unify with North Ossetia. I get it. But and Gergiev became conductor of the Mariinsky, former Kirov, and the Mariinsky is just fantastic. But you know, every time now I see him, every time now I hear these recordings, I can't think about anything else than Gergiev conducting this orchestra in the ruins of Aleppo and not being willing to go against Putin. Well, at least he's consistent, but consistent in the wrong way. How can I think of Russian music and Russian conductors without thinking about what came after them? Pushkin's nationalism. Then the famous defeatist attitudes of Russians that is so celebrated in Russian literature. Has all this helped people to bring someone like Putin up? Has all this played a role in Russians not saying no to this tyrant? You have to ask yourself these questions, and believe me, I'm from Germany. I'm German. Over the question of my Germanness hangs the question, has all German culture pre-1933 been leading up to 1933? I mean, if you're a thinking person, you have to ask that question. When I look at Goethe and Schiller, do I see Hitler? When I listen to Bruckner, do I hear Hitler? When I listen to Wagner, do I hear Hitler? The Nazis thought they'd hit. Nazis also loved Beethoven. Actually, Beethoven was probably their favorite composer. I hear Bruckner's Seventh. I love the symphony, but it was the symphony played for Hitler's funeral, as far as I remember correctly. I think Karajan is a good conductor, but he was in a Nazi party. As a German, I can't think about German culture without what German National Socialism has done. So when I think about Russian culture now, I ask myself, World War II was started by Germany in alliance with the Soviet Union. The Germans attacked Poland, and like 2 weeks later or so, the Russians attacked from the other side. They split the area amongst themselves, as Germany and Russia have done throughout history. Hitler and Stalin happily united until Hitler decided to attack the Soviet Union, when then the Soviets became the good guys and were helped massively by the Americans. That's the way that the Soviet Union defeated Hitler. The Soviet Union means Russia, Ukraine, and all the others. So, do I focus on the Soviets or Russian culture that defeated Hitler? Or do I look at Putin and see a trajectory from the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Holodomor, Stalin's purges, and the evils of the Soviet system, and say, you know, what you have there is something historically predictable, and Russian culture simply is tainted by this now. I don't want it to be. I mean, I go shop in Russian food stores because there's some foods I want from that area. I mean, I don't want Russian culture to be damaged by that, but for that not to happen, Russia needs to stand up to Putin. And I see a lot of interviews online where people in their private lives seem to disagree, but they need to make this political. I know it means prison. It may mean death or other things. But there are some Russians out there that speak up against all of this. If Russian culture wants to survive, it has to make a stand. But Putin and his cronies now complain about Russophobia. Well, he's the one that's the biggest Russophobe because he's contributing to it. He's the prime cause for Russophobia. Does he love Russia? What does Russia's future look like? Forget Moscow and St. Petersburg, they're outliers. Look at little towns in the regions throughout Russia. There are plenty of YouTube channels that show you how people in Russia live. And yeah, there's poverty in the West. There are parts of the United States that are embarrassingly backwards and poor and discriminated, and all of this. I've been to many of these areas. There are parts of the US where I figured, like, you know, why did we go do nation building in Afghanistan and Iraq when we can't even build our own nation here? They still look 1,000 times better than what I've seen of Russia. The poorest people in the US live better lives than average people in Russia. Pensioners make so much more money. And none of that is relevant if you think of all the lives lost in this useless war. Can Russia win? No, it can't. It already lost. It's just prolonging the inevitable. How has Russia lost? It has created definitively a Ukrainian identity. It has, if it wasn't so gruesome, Vladimir Putin should be recognized as the one Russian tyrant and butcher that finally allowed all Ukrainians to say, no, I don't want anything to do with Russia anymore. Not for a long time. As Zelensky mentioned. I mean, Fridman speaks from the position of someone born there, but having grown up in the US. He isn't, I mean, he's Ukrainian by blood, but he isn't Ukrainian by lived experience. And I understand how he wants Ukraine to just make peace and let the killing be stopped. But in the face of such a danger, in the face of such a butcher, what choice is there? Ukraine needs protections. They need to be in NATO. They need to have all their territory back. This tyranny cannot be rewarded, and Putin needs to be punished. And ordinary Russians need to ask themselves the question, what can I do to take responsibility for the future of Russia and of Russians in a post-Putin world? How can we start today as people who identify as Russian or identify as part of the Russian world, whatever that means, to make sure to create a pathway for a Russia that is not indelibly tainted by what is happening today. And so the question, does Putin love Russia? I don't know how anybody could ever ask such a question. Putin loves his own idea of what Russia should be. He loves the size of what it could be. He loves how Russia stands for this megalomaniacal idea of being the biggest country on the planet. Doesn't even have the biggest population. Now, I guess if you actually came to Russia from Lisbon to Vladivostok, if Russia can even keep Vladivostok and doesn't lose it to China in the future. But this isn't love. If this is love, then we are taking up the language of an abuser. This is the love that the rapist has for his victim. This is necrophilia. This is love of death. This is love of someone or of people as an object that you have to control. This isn't love. This is hatred. Putin hates Russia. He hates Russians. And he hates Ukrainians for showing the world what he really is. Thank you very much. Thank you to Lex Fridman for conducting this interview. Thank you to Volodymyr Zelensky for showing people that leadership, true moral leadership, still is possible in this world. And otherwise, Ukraine must win. Putin's Russia needs to be defeated, and Russia has to do better after him. Thank you very much. This is Dr. Phil Kneis. This is Erratic Attempts, and see you soon.